Jodi, great to catch up with you again this morning. For those people who don't know Jodi, she's a specialist in psychological marketing. Would that be correct, Jodi?
Basically, I call myself a marketing and behavioural insights consultant. So looking at the psychology and all of the behavioural insights and consumer behaviour that drives like the underpinning marketing strategies.
Looking at the world a little bit differently, I think you've got to dig beyond what is the norm and understand who it is you're actually trying to talk to, and try and find something that's going to engage and interest them is always part of the challenge. And I suppose that's your background. That's the way you look at the world a little bit differently. It's not so much cookie cutter. So in my world, it's all about revenue. And a really important part of that is, how does a business engage with clients and how do they get them to respond? My world goes beyond marketing and through to sales and how you put the project out and how you put the product out and how you onboard them. But I actually see that marketing and the client is carried all the way through those pieces. So while you might start with marketing to engage them, those messages of what you're saying to people should carry all of the way through, in my opinion. Is that what you
100%.
find companies are doing, Jodi? Or
yes and no. I guess the biggest thing I see with a lot of the clients that I work with is we spend a lot of time and a lot of focus on marketing the business and that brand awareness and getting new clients and what that looks like. But then once they get the client, they tend to just forget about them, not forget about them per se, but they don't do that whole customer experience or client experience and the journey and the retention and that whole personalization process. And that's where the old school funnel, I hate that word, but the old school funnel just doesn't work because it's designed to get the client, but at the bottom of the funnel, they just fall out the bottom. There's nothing to then balance it back out, which is more of an hourglass. So it's more, like you were saying, it's an entire process, a holistic process. And from a revenue perspective, it's easier to keep a client, retain a client, than it is to consistently be trying to chase new clients and market to new clients. I guess that's one of the strategies that I work a lot with my clients, is that client retention and that client journey and that personalization of that experience with them.
It's really interesting because so marketing, obviously, and we had a little chat about before we jumped onto this about what is marketing and how do different people see marketing. So in my world, I see marketing as a message and a vehicle to engaging with clients, building brands, but then that should ideally be carried all the way through a client's journey. So how do you quite often find when you first start talking to clients, what do they see? What is marketing?
Yeah.
How do you talk that through with them? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the answer is like how long is a piece of string, because everyone's different in what they perceive. But unfortunately, as well as fortunately, over the past probably 10 or 15 years, the shift with social media and the likes is where most people see marketing. So they think of marketing and they just think of social media, and they think of the content and the videos and the reels and LinkedIn and that sort of thing. It's been a real education piece, trying to educate people that marketing goes beyond social media, and it's all about getting back to the grassroots and building your foundations first of understanding the target market, not just who the client is, but what triggers them, what motivates them, how do they think, like how does their brain work, which is the psychology and behavioral science piece. But what that looks like from there, so building out the sales engine, once you've got all of your messaging, once you've got your ideal client like down pack, once you've then worked out what strategy or what platforms and channels are going to work for your client, and then building authority and building that customer experience and that customer journey, and just really tapping into that human connection side of marketing, which I think a lot of businesses lose because they're just so busy putting out videos and putting out content. All the marketing gurus out there telling you need to post 5 or 6 times a day. And so it's just, there's a lot of misinformation. So whilst the digital and social media side of marketing has been great for businesses, it's also been overwhelming because now there's too much information and you don't know what's right and what's wrong. And so a big part of what I do is come in first and just really stripping it all back and getting the foundations. And then that education piece, hey, this is what we're going to do. What do you want to do? What are your goals? And then how are we going to execute that? And then all of that understanding piece that goes with it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think that's the core to so much of this, and where a lot of businesses do struggle is there's the hype of the marketing. I love, let's get 20 times. 20 times what? If I've got nothing, then it's 20 times nothing. If I've got $1, it's 20 times that. So it's a really interesting just marketing, using marketing. But
So just on that, I just want to say too, a lot of businesses are just marketing for the sake of marketing because someone told them they had to. Whereas there's not a lot of businesses that are doing it with that purpose and that strategy behind it. And that's the downfall that we see, like what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so many times that the business, I work on what's called a revenue plan, which sits below your strategic plan. And how do you actually create your revenue? And what are all the steps that you need to do? And obviously, marketing is an integral part of that, as far as I see it. But unless you've actually got the understanding within your business, what is the journey we're going to go on as a business? At what point do we involve or engage with our clients or potential clients? How do we want them to act? And then what is the next step? What do we do? What do they do? What do we do? What do they do? And to actually be able to map that out, then I think really allows you to understand where your marketing is going to be most powerful and where you can really invest for your outcomes. I think that's much as you're saying that quite often marketing is done as, I see it very often as a reaction to something else happening in the business. So it's filling a pothole. As you said, let's go do digital marketing rather than going back and saying, let's fix the highway and understand what the highway looks like. And then let's have our strategy. So we're taking the right exit ramps. We're bringing the right people on at the right time.
Yeah.
I just made up a highway analogy.
That's all right. I actually use the maps and like road trips all the time in my analogy because it actually makes perfect sense. I always tell my clients, trying to explain why strategy is so important, having a plan is so important, because without your GPS or your map, like you wouldn't get in a car going to an undisclosed, like a new location without actually knowing how to get there first. If you want to go for an adventure and go on a road trip, and you probably wouldn't, and it'd probably take you maybe a day or two longer to get there. But if you've got a plan and you know where you're going and you're following that, maybe there might be a detour or whatever along the way, but you've got a general idea of like the destination and the goal of what you're doing, which is your plan and your strategy. So it's when I explain it to people like that, they're just like, oh, that makes sense, because I wouldn't drive somewhere without knowing how to get there before I go, doing that research or putting it into the GPS and directing you. But for some reason, they'll happily say, this is what we want to do, but we'll just wing it and see how long it takes us to get there.
If you're going back to that journey analogy, if you're going to go to Ireland or Moreton Island, you're going to need a four-wheel drive. So you're going to need the right vehicle. You're going to need the right navigation, all of those different things to be able to get
and
there.
book your ferries in and your time.
Have you got enough fuel that you're not going to run out halfway through? And I think even those things, what happens with a lot of strategy, it really needs to be taken back in against the budget as well. And how can you optimize it back against that budget? So can I ask, when you're starting to look at a potential client for your clients and you're starting to analyze them a bit, but what are some of the things that you talk about and think about and discuss with your clients? Do you want to share that? Just asking about primary questions. So Jodi, what are, say, some of the primary questions that you ask with clients when you first get them to start to understand? One is who they should be talking to, and two is what are the things that you want to know about those clients?
Yeah, so I guess the first question I probably ask is what's their goal for marketing? Like, why do they, obviously they want it to grow the business, but what is the key goal? Are they a growth phase? Are they in scaling phase? Are they wanting to rapidly increase? Are they wanting to, it might be internal marketing, so to staff and they've got an issue internally. So it's really important to understand what the key purpose of their marketing is. And then from there, once you understand that, it's really important to really nail down their target market and their target client, because I work with service-based businesses, so we're all B2B in terms of their business structure. So the problem with that, I find almost, I would say 9 out of 10 times, I'll ask the client who their target market is or their target client is, and they'll rattle off all the stats of the business, $50,000, $50 million, whatever, blah, blah, blah. What hardly anyone tells me is who within that business that they need to target. And that's the issue, because when you're doing your marketing to a person, you're not marketing to a business. And it's that person who is making the decisions, and it's that person whose emotions and logics are fueling the decision making. So it's really important to understand who within that business you're marketing to, so that we can work out what triggers them, what motivates them, how to tap into their brain, how to tap into their emotions, and all of those bits and pieces. So that's probably the core of the first two questions. And then based on what we get from that is how I generate what flows next in terms of, do you have a strategy? Do you have somebody in-house that can execute it up? What sort of support are you looking for? Because it's all well and good to have a strategy, but if you've got no one to execute it, it literally just becomes a document that sits in your inbox or on your desk.
And thanks for sharing that, because I think to your point, that my old saying is BHP never bought anything, but a lot of people in BHP buy things on a daily basis.
Exactly.
And I think also when you're talking about B2B, and we're probably discussing more B2B than B2C in this case today, is that there's usually a collective of buyers or that sit within that organization. So while it may be the CEO that is the first contact, or it may be someone who's down the chain is your first contact, there'll still generally be a range of people that maybe end up in procurement if it's a larger client. It may end up in need to have their say in it. So I think the buyer persona is a really interesting one to start to explore. And I find when you start to have that conversation with people, so you've got 5 different buyer personas. So who's the most important? And it's a really interesting question. You've got X amount of money. Who's the most important person to get to, and where are they searching on the way through? So that's a real challenge. I don't know whether you've got any sort of thoughts around that, how you can start to look at that from a strategic perspective. I'll give you a hard one.
Yeah, well, I guess it is a difficult one, because obviously if you've got a group of people that need to make a decision, or it needs to go to a board or directors or whatever that looks like, you've got lots of different personalities and you've got lots of different emotions. And I say emotions because people are led by emotions and decisions are made by emotions. So they make the decision based on emotions, but they justify it with the logic. So it's really important to work out who it is that you're tapping into and what triggers and motivates them. So again, understanding their pain point and the challenge and the reason that we're going forward and what they want to build in the revenue, and have they had roadblocks in the past? Because when you're investing a lot of money, whether it be into revenue growth strategies or marketing or whatever it is, it's a big commitment. Like you expect a return on investment. And this is where marketing has a bit of a downfall, because it is very difficult at times to show exact numbers of return on investment, because it could take 6 to 12 months for somebody you're marketing today to actually generate the client for them to come across and convert. It's just, for me, I think it's really important, if you're going into a particular business and you really know what you want and who the people are, it's about doing that research phase and really understanding who each of those people are. Say we're coming in with whatever the project in, like you said, you might have the CEO, you might have the head of CIO and the CFO, everyone. So it's about working out your messaging that's going to align with each person. So your overall message would be the same in terms of how you're trying to connect to them, but you might tweak it slightly to be more of an tweak it, so that generally speaking, people need to see your business 5 or 6 times, even 7 times in touch points before they make a decision, right? So if each of those touch points is angling a different person within the organization, if that's the group that you're trying to organize. So I guess in a roundabout way, that probably didn't answer it, but I guess it's really just understanding who it is and what their triggers are, and really adapting your messaging and your marketing to suit all of those different people and to suit all of the areas that need to make a decision.
Yeah, and I find that by having that end-to-end strategy within the organization, it allows, when you get to that point, to already have some material that is going to start to talk to those particular groups. So if you identify, say, 5 particular groups or general personality, or people that have certain wants and needs as part of their role that they want to satisfy, is another way of looking at it. So one might be more financial, one might be risk, one might be growth. So starting to have your material that's shareable, that allows them to put it into the picture. And I think, and it's also, if you have one champion that tends to be taking from a sales perspective, once you're into that organization, you've got a champion who's trying to push it through an organization, is actually equipping that person to be able to carry a message in the way that you want them to. So a lot of this can be pre-prepared if you understand, I think, how you're going to go about getting your revenue, and you break that down into a lot of micro steps. You anticipate what's going to come, and you have some preparation against that. And I think that's where salespeople can fall down sometimes, or they go off and they create their own marketing. So they go rogue as such.
Always.
Because, and I've run teams that have done that. So everyone believes that they have a better way of doing something, I think, sometimes in a sales team. And that's where that whole process and marketing is there supporting that. But it's also, I think, beyond, it's not just a support function. It's a function that really enables that next conversation, that next decision to be made within an organization. I think that's a really key part, is when you look at it broadly, let's put something on Facebook, we'll get some more leads.
Yeah, and I think the important part is too, and it's the process I take a lot of my clients through, is when we are going through the framework, building your foundations, to building the marketing and sales pipeline, to, you know, building your authority and all of that awareness piece. But what we actually do, one of the activities we do, is we actually stop at each point and be like, all right, so what roadblock, what obstacle, what might you come up against here that a client's be like, no, it doesn't work. So it's really important to, again, like I said, understand your client, to know how they're going to kick back at a certain point and be like, no, that doesn't work for us, and have that ready, that marketing and sales piece ready to go, so that you're like, actually, no, well, we can fix that. This is how we are going to do this. So it's really important, like you said, to have your arsenal of marketing and sales collateral ready to go, and all of your messaging and all of your information. And it does really come down to that research stage and that strategy stage of going, hey, let's be strategic about this. What do we want? How are we going to achieve it? Who do we need? What do we need? And really just go guns blazing once you've got all of that like in place, and all of the processes and systems to back it up.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. So one of the other areas that we work a lot with our clients as part of their overall strategy is, how can their staff actually contribute more, or gain an understanding of what they contribute to the overall revenue and outcome of the business. When we look at revenue, we look at just about every decision that's made, and every action that's taken within a business will very often contribute to some level way to revenue. And as part of that, we look at, as the revenue plan, is be able to share that with staff and say, hey, this is how you contribute, but this is how you can do a little bit more. And that's where we like to engage marketing, to have that discussion about how can you help those individuals each time they are connecting with a client or internally carry that same message, so the client has continuity in everything they feel about the business. So how do you go about getting that messaging through a business is a question.
Yeah. So I think staffs and teams are the most underutilized marketing resource, because people don't tend to use them as the brand ambassadors that they could be if you really built them up into that army of brand ambassadors who are out in the public. They're the ones working with the client. They're the ones forward facing. I think it's really important that communication is the key element, like internal communications with your staff, and keeping them abreast of what's happening in the company, and keeping them involved, and talking about obviously what the brand is and what we stand for and what's our purpose and what are we doing. And when they are going out and speaking with clients, or they are at networking events or whatever they're doing, everybody's saying a similar thing, or it's all got that same core message, that they don't have to rehearse an elevator pitch and say exactly this is what we do, but everyone has to have that core understanding. And I think more than ever, we're seeing businesses move into that more conscious business model, where they're moving away from just the profit and growth, which is obviously a very important point of business really, but they're moving more into the culture and the purpose and the community and the sustainability, and that conscious model that backs the profit and the growth. And that all comes from your culture within your team, and how that, because once you've got the culture within the business, that reflects outside the business. And if people are really happy and really productive and really motivated within their business, and that's going to be reflected with their clients. And so it's really important to make sure all of that communication piece and your staff feel like they're valued and communicated to, and part of the business. So that's where that internal marketing and communication really comes into play, to make sure that you're using your staff to market your business in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I think that to add to that, I often talk about the barbecue pitch for the client. If you're an abattoir, obviously at a barbecue that may or may not go over very well, what an abattoir does. But if you change that same message and you said, you know what we do is we provide for healthy families. So just carrying a simple message like that can really engage the staff. They go out and share that more within the community and gives them, it's really interesting how a little message within an organisation as part of the overall strategy just changes the environment a little bit, just the discussion they have internally, externally, all builds over time. So that one little thing, a little pea under the mattress becomes sort of, no, that's probably the wrong analogy.
No, I get it. I get what you mean. But I guess too, it comes down to also making your staff feel valued. So when they feel like they're actually helping grow the business and they feel like they're part of the business and they've got a purpose beyond just their role, they become much more productive. They become much more involved, and they actually want to go out and tell people about the business because they want to grow the business because they're a part of it, rather than just being an employee that turns up in another number and no one even knows if you're there. And that can be harder when you've got a much bigger organisation, but it just means you've got to work harder in that internal piece and that communication piece and that purpose and culture, which is where marketing works very close with HR and the people and culture departments to really drive that message.
Yeah, and that's where I love it from that revenue perspective. Again, is how does it all tie together? Because if your people are happy, they only got to speak to 2 more people on an annual basis, or someone's retained 1 more time as a client because the message and they had continuity across what they heard, instantly you've increased your revenue with very little effort. And so that's the whole point. When we think about, and I think about revenue and I talk to clients about it, it's lots of little things that all the incremental areas that all add up to an increased revenue.
Exactly.
Marketing forms a big basis of that. If you're missing 30% of your clients that you should be having conversations with, but you're not because you're not speaking to them in the right way, you're missing out on revenue. So again, the investment, I think, into understanding your clients and having a strategy around that. I love the numbers. I think you've got to often just talk in practical terms. If we do 100%. This, the result will change. And over a period of time, whether it's measurable or not, in some cases, we will increase our revenue because the logic just says that's going to occur. So I think you've got to have a plan to actually be able to achieve that. And that's
exactly. I guess that's with anything, right? Yeah. And like you said, it's holistic, especially from a revenue point of view, because if one part of the business falls down, like it pulls everything else down. I can go in and be like, hey, let's do great marketing, blah, blah, blah. But if your culture and your people is not great, and you've got people that are bad mouthing your business, or you've got a really bad name in the reputation in the industry, or whatever that looks like, you can market to the cows come home, and it's not going to, it might increase a little bit, but it's just not going to give you the full impact and the big results that you're wanting. Like everything needs to talk to each other, which is why internal marketing is such a core part of that foundation, to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, everyone's involved and everyone's excited, and your staff are feeling included. Because when your CEO or your managing director is actually talking directly to you, you're like, all right, they're actually telling me something, rather than hearing it down the grapevine. So it's just that communication and messaging piece.
And I think it doesn't really matter about the size of the organisation.
Exactly.
Obviously, it's a bigger challenge. The bigger the organisation, the bigger the challenge to get that continuity. I think also there is that, you touched on brand and reputation in the market. It's another really important point, is that some businesses over a period of time have, one is they have a wrong perception of how they're looked at in the market, and that could be good or bad.
Yeah.
And are there tactics that I look from a revenue perspective and how they're driving? You can pivot the types of services and who you're actually talking to can actually change your reputation in the market. Because if you've got a bad reputation with a certain group, then that's history, but you can actually pivot and actually start to talk to another group. And that's where, again, it involved marketing to say, how do we nullify this part and how do we amplify this part over here? So as an organisation, we're moving away from that history that's bringing us down. But I think clients have to have a realisation that there is history there. Jodi, one of the things that I talk with clients about and I look for your input on is there's always the question of objections when it comes to salespeople, sales training, etc. My theory on objections are a lot of them you will already know what they are after being out in the market for a little while. You'll know why clients don't necessarily want to go forward with you at that time. That may be not make a decision, or it may be not buy. It could be a whole range of levels within that. My theory is get the objections out on the table, have the discussion around them. From a psychological perspective, are you able to provide some insight to why people may pull back and not make a decision, or may not want to go forward with something, just to be able to share?
Yeah, 100%. Basically, every decision we ever make in our life is driven by previous experience. So a lot of what we do in our day, so for example, we make 35,000 decisions every day. Yeah. That doesn't include decisions like breathing and putting one foot. These are like semi-conscious decisions. It's really important to think like that's a lot of information going on in your head at any one time. But a lot of what we do is driven in like in the subconscious brain, where that's where that emotions and that, what's the word I'm looking for? I think what the words I'm looking for. But basically what it is, so people will object because of a previous experience that they had, and it may not be an experience they've had, an experience they've seen somebody else had. It's really important to be tapping into both their conscious and their subconscious, because big decisions, usually what we're seeing when we're facing these objections, are being made in the conscious brain. So they're using logic and they're using facts and they're being realistic about what they're actually doing. But what actually happens is that emotional drivers will actually overtake those logical drivers. So it's really important when you're coming forward in terms of overcoming those barriers, it's coming forward with facts, but also that reassuring emotional side for them, so that they're not being hit with more facts and more logic, wherein you're tapping into that subconscious of previous. So they might come to you and be like, it might just be money. Like a lot of the time, if it's pure financial, then there's not a lot you can do about that, because they are actually capped at how much they can spend. What you can do then is you can just change your approach and the way that you're offering, and you can just reframe the offering and the service that you're going to provide to them in a way of, okay, that's fine, that's your budget, so let's see how we can change up the services and reframe the package and give you what you want, but it might take longer to get there. For example, they might come to you and be like, I've got $10,000 and I want this to happen in 3 months. It's not going to happen. So it's just about reframing your pitch and the sales and that sort of thing, and then tapping into that emotional connection and really trying to drive the subconscious decision to override the conscious decision, which will usually happen anyway when they've got the right information presented to them.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is just getting someone to say, yes, I'm okay, I'm comfortable at that point. Now, take me to my next level of comfort, take me to my next level of comfort. And a lot of that sits around, as you say, that it's a little bit like when people only promote the features of something, they're only promoting the logic. They're not getting someone to actually think about the why. So this feature will save you 10 hours a day, and they go, that's good. So you can go home and see your kids early. That's a different situation.
Exactly. And that's where you're tapping into that emotional side of it.
Side, yeah. And I think that's so much the key, is that it's having that discussion. It doesn't matter whether it's a salesperson talking to someone or you're putting it through your marketing stream. It's understanding what is the benefit for that person at that point of engagement you're having with them. Because once they've moved and they have a comfort level with that, then it's getting that person or buyer or influencer, I hate using that word in today's world, but someone who's influencing the buying process within the journey. So I think that's understanding, be conscious that people, they think differently the more interaction you have with them, because they have a compounding knowledge of what you've already shared with them. What I find also, though, quite often is that there's an expectation of knowledge that sometimes people don't fully understand. And you probably find this in marketing, that people go, everyone knows what we do. And that can quite often not be the truth. What does a certain business do? A lawyer's not a lawyer. There's 100 different types of lawyers out there, and they all provide different services. And so do you find that when you're talking to people in the same thing, how do you differentiate to someone's service, and how do you get them to understand how to be different?
And that comes down to that discussion we were talking about earlier, where working on your foundation. So once we've got all the foundations and your messaging is built off that in terms of what makes you different, because for me, there's a million marketers out there. It's a very competitive market. And that's why when I started my business and I started doing consulting work, I was like, well, what makes me different is that I come with this consumer psychology and this consumer behavior and the consumer insights and side of things, and using that to actually make sure that your marketing is actually going further and doing so with purpose, rather than you'll find a lot of marketing people are marketing strategists or marketing agencies or whatever, and they work with the strategy and what we've always known in terms of marketing, but taking that step back and really understanding and really building on how the brain works and the subconscious and the conscious and all of that sort of stuff, about all of that stuff that triggers people to make decisions. And once we know how to tap into those triggers and the motivations, we can influence marketing strategies to drive the action. Is having those steps along the way about working out what is your differentiator, what makes you stand out. And at the end of the day, it may be that your people are your differentiator. Like we've got this, it might be an IT company that offers managed services, and they might be like, well, we've got these sort of skills, like these are the skills that we have, and that's our differentiator. So yeah, really that comes into the foundations of your marketing.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's probably one of the worst things you can say if you just say our people are our, and you don't flesh that out. And I see that so often. It's we do this, our people are different, we care about our clients. All of those things, that they're really good motherhood statements. And I think in today's world, there's an expectation that you should care about your clients. You should have good people. You should have all of these things.
Exactly.
So by simply stating what is the bleeding obvious in some cases, or what
and
is
everyone else.
and that's not a different. And I think this is where sometimes I'm talking a challenge by it, because it's not a world they live in on a daily basis. The fact is that if you are a professional services firm, for example, you will have a good skill set, you will have good people, you will look after your clients. That is expected. So what is it you do differently is the challenge. And it's not an easy route to take sometimes. And people have to dig pretty deep, I think, and they have to be prepared to change their view a little bit and go down a little bit of a different direction sometimes to start to differentiate themselves and what they do, and ask some hard questions.
Exactly.
But it's worth it at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, and it's also important to not just say what you do differently, but actually show what you do differently. And that's where a lot of companies fall down, because especially when it comes to like their purpose and their values and their culture, they're like, this is what we do and this is what makes us different. And I'm like, that's all well and great, but if you're not actually out enforcing that and actually acting on that, it just becomes words. And this is the problem where a lot of businesses fall into trouble, because they're not being transparent, and they're people are just seeing straight through what they're saying. And one of the examples of that is, say, Pride Week. So it's Pride Week and all these businesses are like, we're inclusive, we're diverse, we support a safe environment, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. They put their little rainbow icon on their LinkedIn account, but they don't actually do anything in-house to support that community within their staff that fit within that community. And they don't actually do anything within that other than saying, we're inclusive, we provide a safe environment, and here's a rainbow icon. So it's actually damaging to a brand that does that when they're not actually enforcing it. Whereas if you've actually got people within your business that are actually driving that value and are driving that inclusivity and really creating that environment and culture for your team and your clients, then you're more likely to align with other businesses and other clients the same way, who are actually authentically doing that as well, as not just saying it, but actually doing. So I don't think businesses understand how damaging that can be when they're not actually following.
True, yeah. And I think it's a little bit of less and more. I'd say a lot of companies are trying to be everything to everybody. And so there's a lot of really valuable causes out there, or movements out there. So I don't think it's possible for most organisations to be,
unless you're a global company that has like 100,000 staff, and you can that's a different story. But when you're like a small to medium-sized business, it's about finding your purpose and really actually implementing and living that purpose
And I think it's how you change people's lives is probably a key part of that. That's what I always try and dig is, if you're a lawyer, you're an accountant, you're an architect, whatever your role is, you're making an impact. What you're taking to market, how you help people, the things that you do actually make an impact in people's lives. And that's the value quite often that I think people forget about within their own organisations. And so they will attach themselves to a whole lot of other areas.
Exactly.
So it's a balancing act. Again, I think it's about a business deciding how they're going to have that face to market, how they're going to interact and how they're going to engage. And yet be passionate about certain areas. But I don't think you can be passionate about everything, because it becomes a little bit scrambled after a period of time, or it doesn't have any depth.
Exactly. And you end up confusing your client and your market and your audience. It's important to have that purpose. And that, again, that's what I was saying, that conscious business model. It's really important to show that you are a conscious brand, that you do have that purpose and you are building community and culture and working within the community. But again, like with your marketing, it needs to be done with purpose, not just because somebody told you had to do it. Like, it needs to align with your bottom line, because once that all aligns, well, your marketing happens and all of your culture happens, and then your revenue grows and your clients like align, and all of those pieces start to fall together. So like you were saying, like in terms of strategy, you've got to have your overarching strategy, and then like your marketing strategy feeds to that and your revenue feeds to that. And it's like all of the different layers. And I think that's where a lot of businesses fall down, because they are so focused on one area and that's really hard when it comes to marketing, when you're just we just want to market our services. And I'm like, that's fine, but we need to build your brand. Like, you need to have this brand that sits behind your marketing. Otherwise your marketing doesn't work.
Right. And I don't think it has to be complex. And I suppose I just want to point that out, that these things can be relatively simple. You can jump on a whiteboard like one behind me and say, let's just understand 10 things that we really want to understand about our organisation. What is our goal? And the goal is really important. These are our financial expectations. Great. How do we go about achieving those? What are the things that we currently do? What are the things we can control and change? Mm-hmm. And let's list those out. Let's just put them on a whiteboard and start with that and start to see those influencing factors. And that quite often will give businesses a little bit of direction to say, and to me, it's not about radical change necessarily. A lot of it's about incremental change.
Exactly.
So it might be just remodeling your pricing, but if you're going to remodeling your pricing, and this is where I always carry on about the ecosystem, then you need to also look at, okay, does that take a slightly different message? Does that talk to a slightly different client? And so that's why I think when marketing comes in, if you're going to put a different pricing model or you're doing something different, then you need to also understand how you're going to share that message with your current clients, what the impacts are going to be, and what that means for your future clients. Then there's also the revenue modeling and all of those other things that go along with it. So again, it doesn't have to be complex, but it's just got to take the big areas and it's got to be a flow. This happens, then this happens.
Exactly.
These things could happen. And starting to have a consciousness of that.
Like you said, it doesn't need to be complex, but there needs to be a plan. Like, it needs to be a process. Whereas a lot of businesses are very reactive in the sense where they're like, we just want to do it and let's do it now. And they do it. And then you're like, we're playing catch up, because now we're just trying to work out how that happens, and clients are confused as to why this has changed, and staff don't know what's going on. And so it's about really having that continuous process and that plan to follow, to go, all right, we're changing our structure, or we're rebranding, or whatever that looks like. First of all, let's communicate to our staff, because they need to know before our clients know, because they need to know what we're saying and what we're doing and what the new structure or what the new whatever looks like. Then you get that communication piece out to your clients, where you're like, all right, this is what happens. And then you do your broader marketing piece. So it's again about, and then for you, like from the revenue perspective, you've got your own steps as well to follow in terms of, this is what we do here and this is how we do it and this is who is involved. But again, all of those pieces need to work together. So you can't just have marketing and sales over here doing their piece and revenue over here and IT over here. And when you work in silos, that's where the confusion happens and your brand breaks down, because no one's communicating, or there's no consistency within the business and the message and the branding. And even in that process, it's really, and one thing I always do when I hold a workshop with a client, they usually bring the managers in and all of their decision makers. Bring 2 or 3 people who don't sit in the management decision level. Bring somebody who's in the business. One of the hate to say it, but one of the cogs that is making the business turn and actually talking to the clients and out in the industry, because they see the business from a very different perspective to the people at the top making decisions and the revenue, because your decision makers are very much, here's our bottom line, this is what we need. You might have a consultant, or you might have like even your admin person, and they're like, I'm the first person your clients talk to when they come into the office. This is what they want to see. This is how they perceive us. This is, I see what happens in the office, and the culture's off, or whatever that looks like. Having that mix of decision makers and management and your actual people on the ground doing the work makes an entirely different structure and helps with the strategy building to make sure you're really resonating.
Yeah, and that's where we go back to that same thinking that from revenue perspective is all about, it's a whole lot of incremental steps done throughout a business. And that person who's on reception and how they view it and what they do and what their role is has an incremental effect somewhere along the line, or a ripple effect as a minimum running through. So I think that diversification of inputs is really important. Again, the company might only have 5 or 10 people. The same issues or the same opportunities apply for very large or very small companies. It's just the way it's approached and the speed that you can actually take something to market.
Exactly.
Obviously, in a big organisation, it's a little bit like moving a ship, turning a big ship. You can be a lot more flexible in a smaller organisation. I think just on your other point too is that unless in a railway situation, when a train takes off, there's a lot of slippage. So what happens is that the wheels turn really fast, but they don't necessarily get a lot of traction. And I think when you go off without that strategy or without that alignment within the business, then you're getting that slippage. So you feel like you're moving really fast, but when you actually look at the result, you've only moved a few meters where you should have moved 100 meters over that period of time.
Exactly.
And that's how I try and explain it to people, that little bit of investment in understanding where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, is about not wasting resources. Most people hate to lose things.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole psychological bias on loss aversion, and the whole people will feel a loss 2 times more than they will a gain. So they're more likely to act when they think they're going to lose something. And that's a lot of, obviously it's a fine line as to how you use that in your marketing, because you don't want scarcity. You don't want to be scaring people, or like, you're going to lose everything if you don't sign up. But at the same time, you can be very tactful and strategic in that sense, because you're like, it can be something as simple as, if you don't act now, like, where will you be in 12 months? Will you be where you want to be, or will you have lost $5 million in business, or whatever that looks like? But it's, like you said, you have things in place, in that strategy in place, so you're not losing in that slippage. And it's, I think the really important thing is just making sure that you've got something in line to follow, to make sure you're getting there, so you're not wasting time and money and effort and, like you said, resources. Because do your marketing, what I would say, do your marketing with purpose, on purpose. Don't just do it because someone told you had to.
I think that is so important. And it's really good to see the alignment of the 2 areas, and we think strategically. And as a business, it's always a range of businesses over time. Quite often from a owner's perspective, it's good, I want to get on with it. My expertise is in building X or doing Y. That's what I want to do. Why can't we just do it? So there's an element of frustration that sometimes creeps in. And that's part of it. If you have a plan, if you have a strategy, that allows that frustration to be understood. But also, you can have a look at how certain areas can be countered. And for an owner, sometimes it's, okay, now I understand that, I get that. So we're going to have to we're going to need to pivot this way slightly, and we will get to that end goal. A lot of people who build businesses drive very hard. And so they don't see brick walls, they look forward to a brick wall.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's that alignment between marketing and revenue, which is, hey, that's what's expected, but you just don't understand the two a lot of the time.
See, even revenue, I go back to, a lot of people don't understand what revenue is, because it's a line item on a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
it's
they think profit.
What revenue is. So part of my challenge is actually to get people to understand that no, revenue is profitable revenue. And they go, how does that work? Isn't it a line item? So even though a simple word like that is a really good example of people, like if I say I'm a lawyer, again, a lawyer's not a lawyer, we know all of those things at the end of the day. So there's that constant challenge of what value do you give to me? Right? I say, I make you more money. And people go, that's great. How? I build your revenue. Well, how do you do that? So, and that's all you want, let's face it, is a how question.
I get it exactly the same, Mark. I tell people like what I do, and then like, they're like, so social media. I'm like, no, I actually don't do anything social media. And they're like, what do you do then? And I'm like, marketing's a lot more than just social media. Like I have an entire.
We didn't touch on the 5 P's, 6 P's, 7 P's. And I think,
I don't even know how many P's there are now, to be honest.
No, but that's a really interesting one from a separate point, that I think that there's so much crossover these days of what's marketing, what's sales. And this is where my pitch around the revenue is to say, let's put something bigger over the top of all of that. And then let's bring in those specialist areas as we understand the bigger plan to add value to it.
And because I think you've got, like you mentioned, all the P's that you've got. And like I said, I am lost with how many P's there are now. There was 4 when I went to uni a million years ago. And there's 5, and then there was 7. Someone told me about 7 the other day. So for me personally, like one of your pieces is obviously pricing. And I personally don't think pricing should sit in marketing. Like I think that's a higher up, like strategic level. Obviously you would work with marketing, but I feel like pricing should be worked with the whole department. Like everybody should be involved in that process.
Pricing, because it impacts product and all of these things on the way through.
And from a marketing perspective, if you're pricing too low, then I'm like, you're not putting your brand in the best light. If you're pricing too high, I'm like, so I feel like there's input, but I don't think pricing sits in there. But then one of your other P is people, which technically I don't, again, think should be a standalone, because people fits in all of the P's.
Still external.
Marketing is people. Like the entire thing is people. Like it's people marketing to people, and it's about that exactly. And it's all about that human element that goes with it. And I think that's where a lot of people fall down in that B2B space, because they're not thinking like marketing to people, like we're marketing to businesses. And like, no, you're marketing to people. As a person making that decision, like, or whoever it is.
The word these days is, I want to go get logos. So what do you mean? I want a Telstra and I want a BHP and I want to, okay, mate, that could be the worst thing your business ever does. But anyway, let's go and have a conversation.
Let's have a conversation and tell you why that's the worst thing.
But I think it's to wrap up. So I think that the P's was, from what I understand, it's probably true to a degree, is that there's people within that marketing that wanted more. So this is, you go back 50 years ago, what did a marketing department look like? What did the board look like? So it was like HR. You look at the things that HR grabbed underneath them now that weren't under HR a period of time ago. So, I think these roles evolving, but also pulling things in underneath them.
You think of marketing 50 years ago, and obviously you would think advertising agencies. And it's funny because I've recently just finished watching Mad Men. I think it's called. And I was just, obviously from a quality perspective, it's not great, but like from an advertising and marketing, I'm like, that was marketing, having an advertising agency.
But that's the way the world was too. So
exactly. And like now it's very rare.
Some guys and they're mainly guys in marketing agencies, and that's fairly true.
Exactly. And that's what it was, because like marketing was printing in newspapers, like that was in TV or radio commercials, and that was considered marketing. Now people are like, we're a digital marketing agency. I'm like, realistically, you don't need to differentiate between a digital marketing agency, because digital marketing is just a predominant part of marketing now. So it's very different.
It's a conduit to getting a message out. Digital marketing is just another conduit, whether it's a magazine or it's a billboard or digital. It's just one of the things.
It just means that we work online. We do online marketing, basically.
And then you have your specialists, which is fine below that they really know how to put the best digital marketing put it in front of the right people. But you've got to know who you want to do and all of the actions that are going to be a result of it. Before you put it in front of the people, what are you going to do with that? Who are you going to talk to? And what are you going to do once they do something?
And again, that comes down to And it comes down to understanding that target market and who you're trying to target, because someone could say to you and be like, Facebook's the best place to be. Like everyone's on Facebook. And I'm like, but if your client's not hanging out on Facebook, then don't waste your time on a social media platform that's not actually going to drive the revenue you want. I had a meeting with a potential client about 2 months ago, and I opened up their website and they had every single social media icon you could think of on there as like marketing channels. I'm like, is this necessary? Do we need to be marketing across 7 or 8 different platforms? Like, where is your client hanging out? And
You just don't get depth, do you? That's the whole
that's
point.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's just you're creating stuff for the sake of creating because someone's told you you had to, not because it's actually working for your business.